So what? Oh, okay. So
I don't have to see it later.
that's all right. So what is when you think of empire? What do you think of? What do you think of when you think of empire? And what is it? And what do we think of when we think about it? Conquest.
I think there's an overtone of bad about the word empire, certainly. I mean, there were benefits to be had from being part of an empire, but we tend to think of it as bad. When we first discussed this idea in the committee, the theme song from Star Wars, the Imperial, the dum 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 da dum dum da dum.
Go to the next one.
The bombast of empire.
Yeah. So
came into my mind.
yeah. Let's see. There we go. Yes.
Yep, there he is.
Yes. I was thinking about you, Chuck, when I put Darth Vader on there. So there are pluses and minuses of empire. So what are some of the pluses? What are some of the minuses?
I think a big plus is if you are of the privileged class, you can travel pretty much anywhere with little fear. And do, you can live with little fear, whatever it is that means. But you have to be in that privileged group.
The example that I use a little bit later this morning from the Acts of the Apostles is chapter 16, where Paul and Silas go to Philippi and get arrested. And so how are they treated before they're understood to be Roman citizens, and how are they treated afterwards? Oh, whoops.
Yep.
You're a person of privilege. So we'll see that exactly in that passage. What else do you think about when you think about empire, good and bad?
Well, if you're a business, I think there are advantages of a larger market. The trade done, particularly under the British and Dutch empires, was incredible and brought a lot of affluence to their home countries.
So to use the British Empire as an example, or the Roman Empire, either one of those two, one of the things that I think about them is the vastness of the enterprise. The sun never set on the British Empire, they would say, right?
Right.
So you could get raw materials from all over the world, sometimes at the expense of the local workers, brought back to the motherland, England, and to be manufactured into whatever you needed. In the case of the Roman Empire, there'll be a map up here in a few minutes. It shows about the vastness of it, that Rome controlled, the Mediterranean. I mean, it was a large enterprise. Yeah.
Well, one thing worth remembering, though, Mr. Vader was not the emperor.
That's right.
The empire, one of the downsides or pluses, depending on where you are in the society, is an empire typically needs a significant military force to maintain itself. Mm-hmm. He's the face of the military in some measure.
Right? I thought about putting the emperor up there rather than Darth Vader, but Darth Vader is just
more photogenic.
He's more iconic.
Yeah,
he's more iconic.
More iconic. Yes. More recognizable than the.
But he's symbolic of one of those needs of an empire, of having a military force.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Force.
Yes. One of the good or bad things, how you think of it, of empire, is it can carry the religion of the ruling country throughout the empire. Certainly the Portuguese did, the Spanish did throughout their empire, the British did. The problem is they imported a type of Christianity that was that had grown up over many years in their home countries into and tried to superimpose that form of Christianity onto peoples who were very different culturally. It brought a lot of their culture, and it became very confusing, I think, in many places, what's culture and what's Christianity, so it's good and bad.
Well, and then as a corollary to that, it devalues often, I'm not necessarily does, empires typically devalue the local cultures of the folks who become part of the larger empire.
Right.
The empire's way is best. We know best, people.
Uniformity is something that often is of significant value. Not always, but often.
Pretty often.
Any other thoughts about empire just off the bat?
Well, that idea that usually the people who are running the empire think of themselves as somehow significantly better than those who they rule. I mean, I certainly, being part, for example, of the Peace Corps many years ago, we in the United States, the United States basically in the 60s was the ruler of not in a military sense necessarily, but really kind of ruled large parts of the world. And we thought of ourselves as really just bringing modern culture and modern facilities of all kinds to the poor people of the rest of the world. And I think that's pretty typical of whoever rules the empire, that they see themselves one step above everybody else in the world.
Let's think just for a short bit of time about the Roman Empire, because we're going to spend a little time talking about doing presuming we have the time to do it, a piece from Luke's Gospel and then a piece from the Acts of the Apostles. And those take place in the context of the Roman Empire. So what do we think about, we've already talked a little bit about Rome, but what do we think about the Roman Empire and the effects that empire had on Christianity?
Well, the communications infrastructure.
The communications infrastructure?
Common language.
Common language?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Latin eventually on the eastern part of the Mediterranean. Greek was really the common language left over from the Greek, from
the previous empire.
Previous empire, yes. So yeah, Greek was common. So, and eventually Latin.
I mean, it was feasible for Paul as an educated Roman citizen to take the gospel in. I mean, he didn't go to the whole empire, but he went to, more parts than what would have been, I think, expected for the time.
Yeah.
If you were, I don't know.
And with a common language, it would be possible to communicate, if not with everybody, at least with, I don't know how many of you traveled internationally, but, what did they say? A person who speaks 3 languages is trilingual, and a person who speaks 2 languages is bilingual, and a person who speaks 1 language is American. So,
Is American.
Yeah. So, it's easier to get around than I'd like to admit with just 1 language. Getting around France, somebody's going to be able to speak that, and I'm sure that Paul, even if there were other languages, at least there was some commonality with the local language.
We know that he based a lot of his ministry in various cities in synagogues, to start with at least. Do we know whether synagogues had begun using Greek in the synagogue, or were they? I mean, he could speak Aramaic or Hebrew, I'm sure, as well. One or the other.
Yeah.
Do we know whether diaspora synagogues use Greek in the synagogue?
I would guess there certainly would be some Latin in them, because the Septuagint was a Latin translation of the Hebrew Bible so that people in the diaspora could be able to deal with Hebrew scriptures. That was in northern Egypt, I believe. Is that right? That's where I seem to remember that the Septuagint, the translation, comes from.
Maybe that's something to look into in the next few
Yeah.
weeks here while we're. I realized I never asked that question about the synagogues in Philippi, for example, or wherever. What language were they speaking there?
Yeah. In the gospel today, at church, Jesus goes to the synagogue in Nazareth, and the scroll is open and he reads from Isaiah. I guess I always figured that he was reading Hebrew, but I'm making that up. Luke 4 doesn't say, but I guess I've always thought it was that we were to understand that he was reading Hebrew.
I have a comment about all this.
Sure.
There's an outstanding new book published in November by Westar Institute called After Jesus, Before Christianity. And it addresses a lot about empire and about how there was no Christianity until 325 at least. So, and there's, as a member of Westar, I get to listen to different podcasts and webinars with the authors of the book. And on Wednesday night podcast or webinar, the conversation was about literacy. And the scholars agreed that Jesus was probably not literate. And that, so the astonishing thing is that, talk about Jesus unrolling the scroll, and he read from, Isaiah, but how, when he wasn't probably literate, as they say only 10% of the population was literate, and how would he find that, that particular citation? So it's probably something that Luke is saying, because it was all oral, the stories were transmitted orally.
Possible.
Yeah.
On the flip side, though, it's possible that their business in Nazareth may have been something that almost required them to get a measure of literacy to deal with the various. So I don't think we know the answers. I mean, chances are he wasn't literate, I guess, but maybe we think of Nazareth as this backwoods place, and it wasn't such a backwoods place, and maybe it was a pretty good business his dad and he ran.
Yeah, and there's conversation that maybe they worked in Sepphoris, which is like 4 or 5 miles away, which was a highly literate place. I'm not arguing against your position. I'm just saying that they would have been around at least some literacy, whether that rubbed off on him or not.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to take a stance.
And one way of spinning that in terms of the conversation today is Sepphoris is kind of the Roman center of the neighborhood that they grew up in. That he grew up in. Sepphoris is not known in the Bible stories, but it was the bigger town by far than Nazareth nearby.
Wasn't the language Aramaic that they spoke in mainly in Nazareth at that time?
My Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament reading for today in church is from was it Ezra or Nehemiah? Anyway, they're reading the scripture, and the word in the Hebrew, the word in the Jewish Bible says that they translated it, and the footnotes in my Jewish Bible says that's because the people at that time were speaking Aramaic in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, which was what 500 BC. So Aramaic would have been around, if the footnotes are right, for a while.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I always thought Aramaic was the language of Nazareth at the time of Jesus. I mean, but they probably spoke more than one language. They probably also spoke Hebrew.
The Aramaic and Hebrew are related. One probably oversimplification that I've heard is the Aramaic was the spoken language of folks who could read and write Hebrew. Yeah. It's kind of a literary language and not used much in speech. Aramaic was the common speech language.
Yes.
That's probably oversimplifying it, but yeah, some truth to it perhaps.
I'm going to move on a little bit because I'm only on a couple of slides. I want to get a little farther if I can manage to do it. This is a map of the Roman Empire at its height in 117 AD. So you can see the expanse of it. It's pretty substantial. On the southeast corner is Judea. Of course, goes over Spain up into the British Isles, not the whole way up, but into what we would call England now, up to Hadrian's Wall, I presume, is that northern boundary. So, it was a substantial place. If we get far enough, let's see, Philippi is right about here, and so that's where we'll be in the Acts reading, presuming we make it that far. So, any comments or questions about the map?
So the senatorial provinces are ones that were actually, they sent senators to Rome to represent them, and the others were subject provinces.
I guess that's the case. I did this was the map that came up that was big enough to show other areas around whose names show up that weren't part of the empire. So I like the map, but the green and the pink, I did not do any research on that. Sorry.
It makes sense though, because the pink includes Rome.
Right.
It includes other major metropolitan areas in some measure. But maybe they would be folks who wouldn't be part of the empire, or who would resist badly and make problems if they weren't represented at least. I don't know. I mean, it seems like the pink is the central, and then the expanded empire is the green. Right.
That's my hunch.
Anybody here actually study history well? I didn't.
Roman history in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. All right. Would go on? Do you have something to say?
No.
Okay. All right. All right. How does this empire talk apply to the United States? And if you were a minority in the United States, how, we were talking about, Chris talked about the pluses and minuses. Think about that in terms of the United States. How does it apply? If so, how? And if you are a minority, how might you think about answering that question?
I'm sure slaves did not care about manifest destiny.
Probably not.
Probably not many Mexicans either.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't think, they probably care, they probably didn't like it much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it isn't just minority, it's also gendered for a long part of our history. The majority, the voting leadership majority was white male.
Right. And landowner, when, at the beginning of
and only they got representation.
Yep.
So in that sense, you had the imperial, from the outset, you had the senatorial white male America and the imperial, which is all the rest of the Americans. If you want to use that model from the Roman Empire, we were structured very much like that in some ways. Some folks got represented and some folks didn't.
And we still have colonies. I mean, Puerto Rico, Midway, Philippines was a colony up until, last century. It was a colony for 50, 60 years.
We have Guam.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of territories that are, that I think qualify as colonies. If you look at the CDC COVID map, down at the bottom, there's like 8 or so territories that are states.
And we, of course, we have large military establishments, Japan, Korea, Germany, all over the world. We have a lot of military establishments and certainly with our might in economics, we control a lot. We're not going to give you foreign aid this year if you don't do this. And the essence of empire is one nation controlling another. So we attempt to control a lot of the world, not as successfully as we did for a while, but we do try.
Have any of you seen the environmental racism film?
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's an incredible example of empire. The domination and conquering of, particularly in Nova Scotia, the film, of Black communities, and in the United States of Indigenous,
Yeah.
and corporations and banks and large
Yeah.
corporations being part of how empire is
You know, it
conquering.
it seems like the manifestation of empire, if it was at least partly cultural, the Roman Empire, for us it's mostly economic. And it's kind of a government in bed with corporations, kind of an empire.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
and that seems to be, maybe because we don't have a long cultural history to share, a lot of the world thinks we're kind of poor in culture. We do it with other things. We do it with economics mostly, and if it makes the gospel of money.
Yeah.
Fund their money, one or the other can control it. The corporations that have the money. Right.
But, yeah.
I'm going to scoot a little faster here and maybe talk over some of the things that I might have wanted to discuss because we got like 15 or 20 minutes to go, and so I had to pick out. I wanted to pick out an example of Jesus meeting the empire, and it was a little tougher than I expected because most of the time Jesus encounters his Jewish cohorts, and that is not the Roman Empire. It's not that it's unaffected by the Roman Empire, but it's not the Roman Empire. So I picked out this scene from Luke 23. Would somebody just read that, and then we'll make a couple comments about it and go on.
Pilate called together the chief priests, the leaders, and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was perverting the people, and here I have examined him in your presence and have not found this man guilty of any of your charges against him." But they kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" A third time he said to them, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no ground for the sentence of death. I will therefore have him flogged, and then release him." But they kept urgently demanding with loud shouts that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate gave his verdict that their demand should be granted. He released the man they asked for, and the one who had been put in prison for insurrection and murder, parenthesis, the one Pilate would have rather had crucified,
Yes.
and he handed Jesus over as they wished.
All right. So Jesus encounters empire here. Let's just say a few words about the empire. What's this empire like that he encounters? It's expediency, right? There's not much care for in the long run about whether Jesus has done anything right or wrong. He's disposable.
And it's still an opportunity to show authority over the subjected peoples. I'm going to have him flogged. That's not a small thing, folks.
Right. Yes. I don't notice that very often. I was noticing that today. He didn't do anything wrong. We'll beat him. And then you can have him back. We'll beat him.
Pretty hostile.
That happens today in communities. But to go back to the Luke passage, part of the empire aspect of that and what Jesus is encountering is how the empire, Pilate, and the religious leaders were hand in glove with one another.
And who those people were.
Who is the power in this area that I can compromise and get to be in bed with me so I can control the region? Right. So Jesus is a completely different sort than Paul is. Jesus is, well, I hate to say powerless, because in John's gospel, Jesus says, I could call down an army of angels and But so anyway, there's a crucifixion picture, which anyway. So let's go on to Paul and empire. And as I said, I was going to use this passage from Philippi. And how does this scene define empire? This is in 2 slides, because the first slide is the text about the arrest, and then the next slide is a continuation with the middle part cut out about the jailer's family converted, about the release. In Philippi, when the slave girls' owners, hang on a second while I get this off, saw that their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the authorities. When they had brought them before the magistrates, they said, "These men are disturbing our city. They are Jews and are advocating customs that are not lawful for us as Romans to adopt or observe." The crowd joined in attacking them, and the magistrates had them stripped of their clothing and ordered them to be beaten with rods. After they had given them a severe flogging, they threw them into prison and ordered the jailer to keep them securely. Following these instructions, he put them in the innermost cell and fastened their feet in stocks. And there's a midnight earthquake, jailer's family's converted, and then this. Somebody read this?
When morning came, the magistrate sent the police, saying, "Let those men go." And the jailer reported the message to Paul, saying, "The magistrate sent word to let you go. Therefore, come out now and go in peace." But Paul replied, "They have beaten us in public, uncondemned, men who are Roman citizens, and have thrown us into prison. And now they are going to discharge us in secret? Certainly not. Let them come and take us out themselves." The police reported these words to the magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Roman citizens. So they came and apologized to them, and they took them out and asked them to leave the city. After leaving the prison, they went to Lydia's home, and when they had seen and encouraged the brothers and sisters there, they departed.
All right, so we've got the 2 slides that deal with Paul encountering empire. How is this? Talk about this and how it's different from Jesus. This is not rocket science.
Well, they have rights.
Yeah, he's a citizen. He's got rights.
And they've been violated.
Yes.
And that creates a problem for the authorities.
Right. Yeah. I'm sure that when they took them to the edge of the town and they apologized, they were, yeah, don't tell anybody. I'm sorry.
Or did they even get to town? Is Lydia's house in Philippi?
I don't know.
I get the impression they didn't leave right away. You can't tell us where to go. We're citizens. We belong here.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how much of a standoff there was here, but we could know if Lydia's house was in Philippi.
Yeah.
Jesus was not a Roman citizen. He was
Right.
treated very differently.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we see before the magistrates realized that Paul was a Roman citizen, he got what everybody else would have gotten. He got beat, feet in stocks, innermost prison. It was pretty severe because they presumed he had no rights.
But the fact that he stood up for himself and say, "Discharge me in secret," certainly not. Like, I want everyone to know you made a mistake.
Yeah.
And that there should be accountability for what you've done.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder why he didn't tell them sooner, before they beat him, or before they put him in prison.
Gary, I would have spoken up.
Me too.
Well, let me move on. There's a picture of Paul and Silas in the innermost cell and the jailer in the front and so forth. And this is a picture of what is understood to be the remains of the jail in Philippi. And there's a little sign here that tells you that. And so I don't know whether, what it is, but it doesn't look very pleasant. So I'm sure it wasn't. This is one other thing that I thought about using, but I didn't. This is a sign at Caesarea Maritima on the Mediterranean coast where Paul was in jail and he appeals to Caesar, which is another sign that he has power as a citizen. I mean, in the end, it's not going to save his life, but it does mean that they can't do with them as they wish there in Judea. All right. So in the last few minutes, let's talk a little bit about Stephanie Spellers, because we're going to be dealing with her book along with these. This is the Church Cracked Open. It's based on a passage from Mark 14, which we'll do in a little bit. So for those of you that are at home and don't see this book that I'm holding up, there it is. It's 152 pages, and if you want to go to Amazon, it's just shy of $15 on Amazon. And we'll be using this for the next few weeks in our conversation. If you don't get it, that's okay. If you get it and read it, it's well done. Stephanie Spellers is on the staff of the presiding bishop, Michael Curry. She's African American, and she dashed this book off pretty quickly in a couple of months, and it's well written, I think. So I commend it to you. So this is the passage that sparked the title. So let's just read the passage, and we'll see whether or not it goes very far. This is Jesus. Bethany is to the east of Jerusalem, a mile or so. In a very short time, Jesus will be crucified. So this is in the last days of his before his crucifixion, just to put it in a setting.
Which gospel is this from?
This is from Luke. This is from Luke. No, I'm sorry. This is from Mark. This is from Mark. And Mark is the only gospel that has this story about the woman who breaks the jar of ointment over the head of Jesus. All right, she breaks the jar and pours it over the head of Jesus. She doesn't break it over his head.
Oh,
I guess I need to restate that, don't I? That didn't come out right. I apologize. All right. So, so would somebody read that, please?
Sure. While Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very costly ointment of nard, and she broke open the jar and poured the ointment on his head. But some were there who said to one another in anger, "Why was the ointment wasted in this way? For the ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii, and the money given to the poor." And they scolded her. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has performed a good service for me. For you have always the poor with you, and you can show kindness to them whenever you wish. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could, and she has anointed my body beforehand for its burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her."
Let me make there's have you ever read In Memory of Her, the book that came out 40 years ago?
Yeah.
There's I'm trying to remember who wrote the book. It's a woman who wrote the book. Anyway, I'm sorry? Fiorenza, maybe she was the one. Anyway, entitled In Memory of Her. And it's kind of interesting. Wherever the good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her. Tell me whether you think this is in the 3-year lectionary of the Episcopal Church, so that at least once every 3 years we would hear this passage. And the answer is
no.
The answer is no. So here we've got this great story about someone who provides this wonderful service, and we're told that whenever the good news is proclaimed, we're going to hear it, and we don't.
Is that part of the Holy Week?
It may be like Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, but it's not Monday, Thursday, or Good Friday. So I wouldn't dispute you on that in terms of a Sunday or a major feast day.
Right.
Or fast day. It's not on the schedule.
Although it's not necessarily true that this is Mary Magdalene, traditionally it is. Is it a reading for her day?
I'd have to look this up. Sometimes she is portrayed as the woman who anoints Jesus' feet.
The stories get mixed up together. If I'm saying traditionally this and that,
Yeah.
but different traditions differ on that stuff.
Yeah. So anyway, this is the passage that spawned the title of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And so let me go on, and we'll read there's the woman anointing Jesus' feet. read what she has to say about this, because on page 5, she says, you know, I want to talk to her. How might she respond to me? Because this is what I want to say to her. This is what maybe she might say. You and your church, you are holding a beautiful jar. You are used to grasping it with both hands, tilting and pouring the contents with moderation through the carefully crafted spout. Someday you will have to break it open so that the contents flow free, or God will do it for you. You and your church, you think loving a thing means protecting and maintaining it exactly as it was handed to you. Someday you will understand what it means to love something enough to let it crack apart and just sit with the pieces, noticing what needs to be removed for good, and then faithfully piece together what matters most to make something more whole, something more like what God intended all along. Someday you will lose your life and gain real life. Oh, child, this could be one of those times. So this, as I say, this is on page 5. So this gets Stephanie Speller's sort of started in the focus of her book. So I decided I'd use that quote. What do you think about the conversation that you'd want to have with this woman who breaks the jar over Jesus' head?
I think the metaphors are mixed. I almost get the impression that the jar is the church.
Yes, I think that
the metaphors are not clear.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not criticizing that. Poetry can be all kinds of different things. It's sort of poetic, the imagery is.
Yeah, the second paragraph, I agree with you particularly, because you and your church, you're trying to protect it like a jar of ointment. I think that's true. Ooh, we got back to the beginning.
All right.
Oh, no, wait a minute. I'm sorry. No, we don't. This is the next slide. How might we imagine the church cracked open? How does empire help or hinder us in the task? I think that's my last slide. That's my last slide. And it's 14 till. I'm sorry?
We made it.
We made it.
You were crazy words.
So this doesn't the problem with the Stephanie Speller's example today is that it doesn't segue very well from the empire. What I wanted to do was to start on empire and start on Speller's, and Speller's will help us get into empire. My example was used to help us get into Speller's more than helping us to see how Speller's deals with empire. So,
as far as empire goes, I don't know whether it's fair to say that the church in some ways is the successor to the Roman Empire. Particularly pre-Protestant Reformation, centrally controlled, large area, significant hierarchy, designation between states of people, their rights and whatever. So, and to some extent, the Anglican Communion has continued that. Some of the other mainline churches are also, centrally organized. And so I think thinking about Christianity as a cracking open of an empire, we ought to be looking at the structures. We ought to be thinking about the structures and thinking about how they help or hinder the mission.
In part, one of the things that I think about is, in part, it has to do with coming to terms with our past in some of these things. How have we inherited the British Empire as Episcopalians? What has that meant for us as a church over the last 250 years? Or longer than that, even in this country when before we became an independent country.
I tend to watch films as they come out rather late, because I wait till the library gets them, partly because I'm cheap and partly because I like subtitles. I wait till the library gets them. And I watched Respect, the Aretha Franklin biopic with Jennifer Hudson this last week. And there was a little shout out, not a very positive one, to Episcopalians once in the film. It was about the behavior of folks. What do you think you are, Episcopalians, about how unexpressive some folks were being at a given point. And so sometimes it's good to have folks from outside look the way folks who are not part of the empire look at this expression of the church and say, these establishment Episcopalians is what you're trying to make us look like right now, and we're not those folks. I'm spinning it a little bit weirdly, but it was kind of interesting. It kind of stuck out there. What do you think you are, Episcopalian? In the film. And what that meant to those folks about what the Episcopal Church was. And I think it has at least two relevant things about it in that film. One is the fifth upper lip British folks who don't express themselves, whereas we have a greater freedom of expression in our part of the church, Aretha's part of the church. And two, it's us and them, those folks, us folks. The kind of wall that somebody put up, or division that somebody put up between not citizens and non-citizens, but in some respects it was citizens and non-citizens, because most Episcopalians came to this country, males became citizens. Most black folk came to the country and didn't. That's part of the history. So there is some connection between church and empire there.
We probably need to quit because Jeremy probably needs to get over to the cathedral to get set up for doing the live stream here. So I don't want to.
I'm doing it today for the annual meeting.
Oh, she is? Okay. Oh, okay. So, all right. Well, anyway, it's 10 till. Anybody have any other thoughts or insights or comments or anything like that?
I'm thinking that what's happening now in terms of the Sacred Ground program and all of the opportunities that, just as one example, Gabrielle is offering to the community is helping crack us open. And not only the Episcopal Church, but let's say what the Jesuits and other organizations are doing in coming to terms with their involvement in enslaving people and coming to their wealth by on the backs of free labor by the people that they own. And a lot of prestigious colleges are endowed based on wealth that they gained from having owned enslaved people. Chuck, you looked a little.
No, I'm just partly because of the film series that some of us are watching, and partly just a deeper appreciation of how systemic some of these things are.
Right.
Is very troubling.
Very
Now, I tended to think, just as a teaser for the film series, I tended to think of the question about food as mostly one of economics and health. It's not just that either. Even what we eat has been tainted, to use the language of poisoning in food, I suppose, is tainted with moral concerns as well. Much of the agriculture that we have, in the form that most of it takes place industrially, has come at great expense to both small farmers, we typically say as small, and indigenous folks. I think of the paradise I think of Hawaii being is people are being sickened badly by Monsanto's crop, pesticide testing upwind of these folks' homes. And I'm thinking, is there any way to extract ourselves from moral issues when it comes to every part of life? That's what's troubling me and kind of doing this to me right now. And I'm saying, is there anything I can do that is not going to have, that is not colored by all of this?
The answer is no.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
I mean, the answer is no. The answer is that, it's so enmeshed in everything. And knowing what to do is hard. You can say, well, I'm going to do this, and you do that, but you've got, 99% of the other stuff you do that still is troublesome in some way.
But we got plenty to talk about for the next 3 weeks, guys.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you all for coming today. God bless you. See, as my mother used to say, see you in church. So God bless you. Take care. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. I know you were here today.